Hi everyone, this is Synth Forever. I thought we would do a bit of a showcase and flip through of a new book I got called Synthesizer Evolution from Analog to Digital and Back. The book was recently released by Velocity Press in the UK, and it was written by Ollie Freak, who is a London-based musician, artist, and author who has a passion for analog synths. Inside the book is a comprehensive directory of every major synth, drum machine, and sampler made between 1963 to 1995, and each instrument is actually hand-illustrated, and it features stats, various trivia points, and quirky facts, including how they have contributed to electronic music over the years. Personally, I think this is a great book for anyone with an interest in synths or their history, and if you'd like to check it out or grab a copy, you can just head over to velocitypress.uk or synthevolution.net. So with that, let's jump in and take a look at the book in detail and do a bit of a flip through of the pages and learn more about some of these synths. All right, so this is the actual beginning of the book here in terms of the illustrations and the actual synths. So let's look at a few of these. So it's 360 Systems in 1982 produced a digital keyboard, and then Axis Music in Germany actually came out with the Axis Virus in 1997, which was an analog modeling synth. And that reminds me that the Axis Virus B was actually my first synthesizer that I acquired in 2012. That's when I got it. So that has a special place in my heart as well. Ace Electronic Industries, aka Ace Tone from Japan, which was the precursor to Roland, essentially. With the Ace Tone PS1000 here, which was an analog monosynth. Then they get to Akai from Japan as well. The Akai AX80 in 1984, which was an analog 8-note polyphonic 2 VCO per voice synth, and it was actually Akai's first professional synth. Following that was the Akai AX60 in 1985, which is a 6-note analog polysynth, 1 VCO per voice. And in my opinion, the Akai AX60 is a very underrated synthesizer. It was released at that time and it was competing with the Juno 106, but it has a lot more features than the Juno 106, so very capable synth, and it sounds fantastic in my opinion. Moving on, they released the AX73 as well as the VX600, and then from there, a different company in Russia actually was Altair with the Astrada 231. This is an analog VCO, 3 VCO monosynth, basically a mini Moog clone from Russia. So, different system there. Moving on, we've got Arp Instruments from the US. Obviously, they released a number of items here, 2002 and 1969, which was their very first production synth, but very few were made. And then you see here the Arp 2500 in 1970, used for the famous end sequence of Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. Classic synth there, very rare. Would love to hear one in person. Beautiful machine. And of course, they released many others, including, of course, the Arp 2600 in 1971, famous as well. 3 VCO analog monosynth. The Arp Odyssey, the Pro Soloist, the Explorer, string ensemble here, the Axe, the Omni. There's the Odyssey MK2, Pro DGX, the Arp Avatar guitar synth, the Quadra, the Quartet, and the Solus. If we look over here, there's actually a Behringer is in here as well. And looks like Uli Behringer in 1977 made the UB1, which was, it says here, before the company became successful as a manufacturer of affordable mixers and effects, Uli Behringer built a synth at the age of 16, and here's the illustration, the UB1 from 1977. Buchla in the US obviously put out a number of modular synths. Buchla Systems, Buchla 500, the Buchla Music Easel, the Touche here, the 400 and the 700 series. And then we get to Casio in Japan with the VL1, which was a digital synth in 1980, and then followed by the 201 in 1980 as well. Consonant-vowel synthesis. Interesting. Mixes 2 digital waves and uses their formants to mimic instruments and the human voice. A lot more Casiotones here. Casiotone models, 101, 401, more consonant-vowel synthesis items. And then look at this, the Casio Cosmo in 1984. Phase distortion, sampling, and subtractive synthesis in one unit. Designed for Tomita as a concept system, it had 6-phase distortion units, wave drawing synthesis, a sample playback unit, sampler, and a sequencer. Very innovative at the time. And Isao Tomita, of course, made a lot of use of this synth in his music. Then we move into the Casio CZ series, as you can see, the 101, the 1000, the 5000, the 3000, and of course the CZ1 in 1986, which used phase distortion, which is a version of FM, 60-note polyphony. It was the last and best of the CZ range. Further Casio items here. And then we get to CEM, or Curtis Electronics, electro music. So Doug Curtis with the chips, which has been used in many different synths over the years. So that's listed here. And then we have the Cheetah synths as well. Now, I've not really come across a Cheetah synth in my time locally. I mean, I've seen them pop up here and there online, but it doesn't seem like Cheetah was very popular compared to other synths. But I guess they're sort of out there floating around. I'd love to hear one of those in person someday. Clavia from Sweden, of course, with the legendary Clavia Nord lead in 1995, which used analog modeling technology, 4-note polyphony at the time. And then Con Brio here in US. So it was the Con Brio ADS 200, which was an additive FM and phase modulation synth. So it says here is based on the prototype. It was actually never sold. Saw one model, never sold. Interesting. Crumar from Italy. Crumar Orchestrator. Ensemble synth. Full polyphony, so it's a divide-down synthesizer. Has presets for brass and piano, clavichord, cello, and violin. And we get the Crumar DS1 and Crumar DS2, both of which are analog and mono synths. And some of them, I believe this one here has a string synth built in as well. And if you've ever seen these in the flesh or pictures of them, they look very industrial, very steampunk look to them. It's very cool. So take a look at those if you haven't seen them before. Then they went on to manufacture the Crumar Trilogy in 1981, the Stratus, the Crumar Spirit, which actually was co-designed by Bob Moog. And then they moved into the Bit 1 and the Bit 99 in 1985. DGS, Digital Sound in Holland, the Scorpion, the Spider, the Digisound, and Digital Keyboard Synergy. Interesting. Doepfer from Germany, of course, manufactured a monosynth here, the MS-404, and of course the A100 modular system. EMU from the US had a number of items in the modular area as well. The 25, the EMU modular in 1973. This is the first product there. And then the Proteus in 1989, which was sample and synthesis based. The Spirit and the Mini Synth. EDP from the UK put out, of course, the Wasp synth, as well as the EDP Wasp Deluxe, which upgraded the membrane keyboard to a standard physical keyboard. And then they had the Nat in 1980. It's a one oscillator version of the Wasp. Echo in Italy. Looks like they put out something here. Electro Harmonix in the US. Had some micro synths for guitars. And similarly something here as well. And then we get to Elka in Italy. Something of a string synth, or an organ top monosynth here, the Soloist 505. But Elka's, of course, most widely known for the Elka Synthex in 1981. And 8-note polyphony, 2 DCOs per voice. The sound of Jean-Michel Jarre's laser harp is from this synth. Very famous. And Element, of course, with an organ. And we get to EML with Electronic Music Laboratories in the US with their various Electrocomp series. So EML Model 100 here. Electrocomp Model 200, 300, 400, and then there was this 101 model as well, and 500. So a variety of different Electrocomp models here. And if you've ever heard one of these, they're definitely sort of Mad Professor type of sounds. Very, very retro vibe, very clinical, and not clinical, but it reminds you of being in a science lab, let's put it that way. Definitely a different type of sound. And then we get to EMS, which was based in the UK, of course, and they have a very famous VCS3, aka the Putney, which was released in 1969. So a monosynth with 3 VCOs, used by the BBC, of course, at the time. And then they put out some others here. The Synthi 100, which was a massive 4-note polyphonic 3 VCO per voice synth, again used by the BBC at the time. The Synthi A, the Synthi AKS, the Synthi E, the Poly Synthi, which was a divide down synth as well in 1978. And then we get to Ensoniq in the US. So the ESQ1, which was of course, famous hybrid synth, so digital waveforms and analog filters, very crunchy type of sound. 8 notes, polyphony, and still today people are seeking this out for its sound. Very unique at that time. They moved on into the VFX range, into the SD1 and SQ1, and then of course the TS10 in 1993, which was digital waveforms and transwave synthesis, as well as the TS12, and then finally they get to the Ensoniq Fismo in 1998. And personally, I've been looking to try one of these. I've never come across one locally or even seen one online for sale. I mean, they probably pop up and get snapped up right away. 48-note polyphony, transwave synthesis, basically wavetables that can be manipulated in real time for evolving harmonics and tones. So definitely a unique synth, and not too many of them out there. Then we get to Russia here with Formanta. And they're most famous for the Formanta Polyvox, which was released in 1982. This is a analog monosynth. And the Polyvox is very well known for a screaming filter. It just screams like no tomorrow, and it's very powerful and aggressive sounding. So if you ever have a chance to try one or hear one in the flesh, definitely take a listen. It's something else, and it's very industrial sounding. Freeman, US. Something called the Symphonizer in 1973. Interesting. It's a preset string synth. And then we get to Gleeman Pentaphonic. Now this is also quite rare. 5-note polyphony. And there's a clear version, and that's exceptionally rare. I was actually able to try one of these when I visited the Vintage Synth Museum in Oakland, California. They had one at the time, and it's definitely a unique synthesizer. Hitachi in Japan. Hitachi put out a synth. It's called the Low D, or HMS-30, in 1978. So it's analog, it's a mono with 2 VCOs, and it included a drum machine and sequencer. Very interesting. Gen Electronica in Italy. The string machine here, the SX-1000 and the SX-2000. And then there's the 508. And then something from Jeremy Lord Synthesizers in the UK. The Jeremy Lord synthesizer Skywave in 1977. Interesting. The Skywave, not being a commercial success, Jeremy Lord later turned to making medical equipment instead. Okay. We're moving on here. We got to Kawai from Japan. Kawai K3 in 1985. Again, this is a hybrid synth, so digital wavetables for oscillators and then analog filters. It also can do a little bit of additive synthesis as well. And I still have this synth myself. I really like this synth. It's very easy to edit on the fly with that knob. You've got a couple of membrane buttons, but it's super simple to edit on the fly. And it has a very nice sort of haunting sound. And that analog filter really warms it up. It's an SSM filter, so love that synth. Then they moved on to the K5, which was an additive synth in 1987. Kawai K1 in 1988, the K4 in 89, and the K5000 series, which was additive as well in 96. And the Kawai K5000 is one of the few hardware additive synths on the market that gives you a lot of flexibility with editing and hands-on control, and it's one of the most sought after in that realm. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. Definitely an amazing synth for soundscapes and alien sort of sounds that you wouldn't find on any other type of synth. It's very cool. Moving on. Korg from Japan. Everybody knows Korg, very famous company. They had a number of synths they released. So starting with the Korg 700 in 1972. This was their first synth, designed for use on top of a home organ. Then you get to the 700S in 74, and then the Maxi Korg 800DV in 74 as well, which was dual voice. Moving on from that, get down to the 770, the PE 100, or 1000, I should say. And then we get to the big boys here, the Korg PS 3300 in 1977, 48-note polyphony with 3 VCOs. Amazing. Very expensive and rare these days, and that was followed by the 3100 in 1977, as well as the further down, the 3200 as well in 1978. So those are incredibly sought after and rare, very expensive now. Of course, they developed the MS-10 series, and then of course, MS-20 in 1978. Everybody knows the MS-20, and it's a classic. Screaming filter as well. The Delta for strings, 1979. Korg Sigma in 1979 here. Lambda, Korg Lambda in 1979. This is a beautiful string synthesizer, and it has stereo output as well. It sounds extremely lush. And speaking of lush, the king of strings here for Korg, I mean, the Korg Trident in 1980. So this is 8-note polyphony, 2 VCOs per voice. There's a brass section, there's strings, and of course there's an incredible built-in flanger that really brings it into the spacey cosmos type of area. You can get really lost with this Korg Trident. It's a beautiful synth, and it's huge. It's massive. It's a beast, and it sounds like a wall of sound. That's definitely a classic. Speaking of classics, Korg Poly 6, of course, also competing with the Juno 106 at the time in 81 there, or perhaps not. Maybe it was before the Juno 106. But regardless, it's a great synth on its own. Korg Monopoly in 81. So 4 VCOs here. You could use that for 4-note polyphony or 1 fat unison lead, and it also had an arpeggiator built in, which you could then cycle through the oscillators. So it's really a fun synth. And then, of course, they went on into things like the Poly 61, the Poly 800, the DW 6000, which was a digital synth, a hybrid. So again, analog filters, and then the DW 8000, which had digital oscillators and waveforms through an analog filter. And then they got to FM with the Korg DS8 in 1986. Following that, there was the Korg M1 here, which had 16-note polyphony, and is actually one of the best-selling synths of all time. That did very well for Korg, and it revolutionized things at the time. Very well-selling synth. Korg WaveStation, 1990. This was vector synthesis and wave sequencing. Very advanced vector synthesis instrument here. And it was actually designed by Dave Smith, who was first seen... Actually, the vector synthesis was first seen in the Prophet VS. That's right. So Dave Smith, when he joined Korg afterwards, they developed this classic. And then from there was the Korg Prophecy, and then a few others. So moving on, we've got Kurzweil, the K1000, the K150, K2000, and then there's something here from Maplin, the 4600. This is an analog mono with 4 VCOs, which is based in the UK. Looks like it was you had to buy a kit. Interesting. Now the big daddy here is Moog Music, of course, in the US. Moog, of course, put out a number of different modular systems over the years, starting in, it looks like 64, and then into 67. There was a number of releases here, so the 1C, 2C, 3C, and then the P series, so 1, 2, and 3. And then they got to the Moog Mini Moog Model D in 1970, and this is a classic, a treasure. Everybody knows this. One of the most iconic synths ever made. I 100% agree. And, it offered the essence of Moog's modular systems in a smaller mini format. Parliament obviously used it, as they note there. And then from there, moving on into other areas, the Sonic 6, more modular stuff, the Satellite, System 55, which was massive, the Constellation, which was a prototype, a system that was to have comprised the Apollo, which was a polyphonic synth, the Lyra, a monosynth, and Taurus bass monosynth. Very interesting. The Moog Micro Moog, Poly Moog, of course, ensemble synth, the Taurus pedals, the Multi Moog again here, 1978, and then we get to the Liberation, which is more of a keytar style, the Opus 3, the Concert Mate MG1, the Moog Rogue, Moog the Source, beautiful sound from that instrument as well. And of course, the classic Moog Memory Moog in 1982. This synth is very powerful, very aggressive in tone. I mean, if you're looking for a synth that can really put the power out there and deliver in terms of crunch and just pure analog power, the Moog Memory Moog should be your ticket. Extremely hard to come by these days and quite expensive, but what a sound. Very powerful. Multivox put out the MX3000 here, which was a bass and lead section string synth. And then we get to Novation, of course, who put out the Bass Station in 93 and then the Novation Supernova in 1998. And personally, I actually acquired a Novation Supernova 2, and it was the second synth I ever got, and I really love it because it's got a lot of hands-on control. So that Supernova series is classic, and it's still a great synth to date. Then we get to Oberheim in the US. So there's SEM models, the 2-voice, the 4-voice, and of course the massive 8-voice, which was extremely powerful. 8 SEMs combined to create a beast of an 8-voice synthesizer. You had to tune each one of these SEMs individually. So incredible sound from that instrument. And then we get to the OBX, of course, legendary VCO synth there. And then the OBXA in 1981, the OB8, the Matrix 12 in 1985. If you guys want to get into lots of deep programming, the Matrix 12 is where it's at within the Oberheim realm. So many features and functions in that synth. It's great. It sounds fantastic. Octave Electronics, Octave the Cat, Octave the Kitten, the Voyetra 8, and the Voyetra 1. And then there's Oxford Synthesizer Company, who of course put out the Oscar in 1983. So that's a very unique synthesizer. Not easy to come by these days. PAIA Electronics, a couple of synths there. PV, interesting. There's a DPM3 here, sampler and synthesis, 16-note polyphony, 2 digital oscillators per voice. Interesting. Palm Products, GmbH, PPG System 100, the 300. We get over to the Wave computers. So they were starting to get into from analog into digital here. And then the PPG 360 Wave computer, which was a wavetable synth. Looks like it's a precursor here to the PPG Wave 2.0 in 1981, which is a classic hybrid. So wavetable oscillators and analog filters. Beautiful sounds from that instrument. And then they have the Waveterm A and B. There's a realizer in 1986. What's this? Analog, FM, wavetable, and sampler. So way ahead of its time, the realizer attempted to be a digital studio that could model analog circuits and other digital synthesis methods. It was never released. Rhodes, of course, with the Rhodes Chroma, 1982, 16-note polyphony, beautiful sounding machine, huge sounding oscillators, and also a large size, physically. Size of this synth is massive. And then, of course, they developed the Rhodes Chroma Polaris in 1984, and I actually still have one of these. That also has a very powerful sound, very high fidelity. The quality of audio from that machine is beautiful, and the filter is very aggressive. It's the best way I could put it, but it has a nice sort of tone to it as well. Then we get to, of course, to Roland here in Japan. Everybody knows Roland. They put out a number of classics. The SH-1000 in 1973 was their first monosynth. Japan's first synthesizer featuring presets and limited editing. And then they get to the SH-2000, the 3A, the RS-101 string synth. And then they get to the Roland System 100 in 1975. This, a complete system, is very hard to find, but what a sound. It's like the VCOs from this are so organic, and it has a mixer, it has a sequencer, it comes with 2 speakers if you can find them, and then there's the synth keyboard itself, and then there's an expander unit as well. Beautiful sound from that Roland System 100, so vintage. Lovely. And then you've got the Roland SH5 following that in 1976, which again is a classic mono synth. Huge chewy oscillators, lots of beef, and a great bandpass filter as well. And then finally they get to the Roland System 700 in 76. This was apparently the most expensive modular system they ever produced, and it's physically huge as well. I personally have never seen one in the flesh, and I doubt I ever will, but it's incredible what you can do with a System 700. Very rare. Guitar synth, Jupiter 4 in 1978, of course, a classic there. The SH7, System 100M in 1979, fully modular, of course. The Pro Mars, the VP330 with the vocoder in 1979, full polyphony, divide down synth. The SH09, and then finally we get to the classic, incredibly legendary Roland Jupiter 8 in 1981. 8-note polyphony, 2 VCOs per voice. Of course, this was used by so many artists over the years. This epitomizes the 80s to me. Just the look and feel of this instrument is absolutely beautiful, and the sound is incredible. To me, this is everybody loves a Jupiter 8. It's just they're out there, but they're so expensive these days, and it's just a true classic. Moving on from that, Roland Juno 6 was released in 82, and then the Juno 60 in 82 as well, which had patch memory. And then they get to the TB303, the Jupiter 6 in 83, which had 6-note polyphony, and then the Roland JX3P in 1983 as well. It's a lot more here. The MKS80 Super Jupiter, the Juno 106, of course, classic, 1984. They produced a lot of these. There's also a version with speakers known as the HS60, which you can still find, usually for a lot cheaper. And 1985 was the Roland JX8P, and then there was the Alpha Juno series as well. And finally, there was the JX10 or Super JX in 86, which was Roland's last analog, it looks like. And then they started moving into the digital realm, starting with the Roland D50 in 87, which was using linear arithmetic samples and synthesis. So 16-note polyphony. And the D50 is a classic. It sounds super lush. There's a very nice grainy texture to it. I still have mine. I love the sound from this synth. It could be a little bit difficult to edit without the PG-1000 controller, but just a complete classic synth there. And then again to the Roland D10 and D20 series, the U series, the JD800 in 91, beautiful digital synthesizer with tons of hands-on control and flexibility with sliders, great rompler, romples using samples from raw memory. And then they get into the JV80 in 91, and a few more items here. JP8000 in 1997. Okay, moving on, we get to RSF from France. So they had a modular system here, the Model 11 in 1976, the Cobol in 1978, so that was an analog mono with 2 VCOs, and then they get to the Poly Cobol in 1983. This is extremely rare, analog 8-note polyphony. It says here, extremely rare synth from RSF, rumored to have suffered severe maintenance issues. The first version was released in 1980. I have never seen one of these for sale in all my time. If you have, please leave a comment. Let me know. But I know people have been jonesing for this. We'll see. I mean, who knows what happens in the future, but that is a classic synth that's highly desired. Seiko put something out, actually, in 1983, an additive synth with 8-note polyphony. Interesting. Sequential circuits, US, of course. So here, sequential, Dave Smith brings us the Sequential Circuits Prophet 5 in 1978 with 5-note polyphony, 2 VCOs per voice, and it was actually the first polyphonic synth with full patch memory. It says here as well, the first 2 versions used SSM chips, and the third used Curtis chips, which were much more stable. And of course, everybody knows the Prophet series. And today, Dave Smith has actually re-released a Rev 4 version for both the Prophet 5 and Prophet 10. So you can actually buy your own Prophet 5 or Prophet 10 now. So it's out there again. Of course, they also released the Prophet 10. At the time, it was a dual setup here with a keyboard. And then they got into the Pro 1, which was the mono synth. And they started getting into other items after that, including the Prophet 600 in 1982. I love that synth. It's I don't own one, but I'd love to. It's a beautiful sounding synth. It has a very dark and brooding type of sound, very organic. A little bit different than Prophet 5. It's got its own character, that's for sure. And then from there, they get into the Prelude, the T8, which was it says here, the culmination and best of the Prophet line. And I remember that this had polyphonic aftertouch, sort of similar to the CS80. So that was quite a beast as well. And a few other items. They had the 6-track, the multi-track, the split 8, and of course the Prophet VS, which was using vector synthesis at the time. 8-note polyphony. So digital waveforms and analog filters. And you could morph through them using the vector joystick. Very cool. Surge, obviously the Surge modular synthesizer in 1973. And then you get to Seal Orchestra, the Seal Mono here, the Seal Cruise, the Seal Opera 6 in 83, the DK 600 in 84, 6-note polyphony, the Kiwi, the DK 80 in 85, and the DK 70, and finally the DK 700 in 86. So lots of different synths from Seal at the time, that Italian manufacturer. And then SSM. So the manufacturers for those SSM filter chips are listed as well. And then we get to Selena, of course, made some lovely string synthesizers, the Ensemble in 74 and the Selena string synthesizer in 75. Sultan as well, using digital waveforms here. Something called the Steelfon S900 in 1970. Steelfon was principally an Italian manufacturer of electric guitars, but they also made the preset S900 series. Okay. Let's take a look here. Steiner Parker. Yes, the Steiner Parker Synthicon, released in 75. Small but influential range of analog synths. The filters were designed by Niall Steiner, hence the name. And of course, that Steiner Parker filter is also used in Arturia synths as well. So there's a number of Steiner Parker synths here: the Synthesystem, the Minicon, the Micron, and then I think that's it. And then we move on to these other synths, the Stramp Synth Changer 4000, the Strider DCS, which was a digital synth with 12 notes polyphony. And then Synton in Holland, a few items here. Looks like some modular gear. The Synton Syrinx. And the Synton Phoenix in 97. And then there was a Technics synth in 79. It's a mono synth. A few other Technics, or Technos items, I should say. Teisco. Very interested in these synths myself. The Teisco Kawai, I guess it was a hybrid or a brand, something going on with the branding there. Starting with their 100F series in 77, analog mono synth with 1 VCO. And then you get to the Kawai S100P, which is a preset synth. And then the 110F in 1980. Very cool. 2 VCO mono synth. That's a very flexible synth. It has a nice sound to it. There's also the 60F, which is another mono synth. And then they get to the SX400 in 81, which was competing with the, the Roland Jupiter 4 at the time, I guess. So it has a different type of sound, but also very powerful. And SX210 in 1983, this was using 1 DCO with 8-note polyphony. And the SX240 as well in 1984. Very brassy tone from that synth. A lot of people like that sound from this synth. It's definitely unique. And they list Tonto here as well. This is a crazy modular system that a lot of bands have used over the years, and very flexible. I think Stevie Wonder as well recorded with this Tonto system. I could be wrong on that, but I seem to recall seeing that somewhere. Vermona as well put out a synth in 1980. It's an analog monosynth with 2 VCOs from Germany. And then we get to Waldorf. So Waldorf with their microwave series, wavetables in 89, and then of course the famous Waldorf Wave in 93, which was 60-note polyphony. This is basically the culmination of their wavetable technology at the time. And there's a few other items here. Watkins Electric Music. Looks like some monosynths. And then Worsi in Germany. There's a bass synth. the Condor digital synth from '84 with 16-note polyphony. Stage synth as well. Some interesting things. Yamaha, of course, very famous in the synthesizer industry. Yamaha GX1 needs no introduction. It is the granddaddy of the CS80. 1973, 8-note polyphony, huge $50,000 pound price tag, and it weighed like almost a ton, I think. It was super heavy, but that was the precursor to the CS80 as Yamaha was developing their polyphonic synthesizer technology. Then they moved into the SY1 1974, a monosynth, SY2, the CS10 series, or CS series for monosynths, I should say. So starting with the CS10 in 77, and the top of the line in the black CS series monosynths with the CS30 as well in 77. And that synth, I still have it. You can see a few demos I've done, but crazy synthesizer, almost like a modular in a box. Very unique workflow, and definitely a lot of flexibility there to get kind of crazy. They also released the CS30L, which was more of a performance version without the sequencer. Now, moving from that, they get into, of course, the classics CS50 and CS60 in 77 as well. These, CS50 4-note polyphony and CS60 8-note. Beautiful sounds from these instruments. Most organic synths I've ever played, I think. I still have my CS50, and I also have a CS60 at this stage. But incredibly beautiful synthesizers, so expressive and so incredibly beautiful. And of course, that was just a precursor to the legendary Yamaha CS80, which was dual channel and 8-note polyphony with 2 VCOs per voice. And of course, it was used by Vangelis on his Blade Runner soundtrack, which everybody at this stage is well aware of. Absolutely incredible instrument. Of course, Yamaha continued with some other models in the CS series line for monosynths, CS5, CS15, CS15D, which is more a preset version. And they also developed a few others in a different sort of line, which was the CS20M and CS40M. Different type of tone versus the black units, a bit more aggressive, also a bit more dusty sounding. So it's just different, but really capable synths as well. And then they get into symphonic series, SK10, and the Yamaha CS70M. I believe this is the last analog that Yamaha made before they switched over to digital with the DX line. But the CS70M is very rare, incredibly expensive as well these days. Beautiful sound from this instrument. Very sort of dusty pads and very Boards of Canada types of sounds. And I've read that it was one of their sort of secret weapons that they used on their albums. Incredible instrument there, the CS70M. Let me move on here. There's a few other items, SY20, the CS01, and here we go. In 1983, Yamaha releases the DX7 with the FM synth here with 16-note polyphony, 6-op FM synthesis. So this sort of changed the world at that time, and everybody started getting into FM and digital synths at this stage. They also developed the DX9, the DX1, which was actually the flagship FM synth, and it had 32-note polyphony as well as polyphonic aftertouch, and it also had a nice display that you could use to see what you're editing. Of course, there's also the DX21 and DX5, which is a step down just a little bit from the DX1. It doesn't have polyphonic aftertouch or the display, but otherwise essentially identical, 32-note polyphony and XLR outputs. And a few other items here, DX series, DX7 2D, which is the next step up from the DX7, the TX81Z rack unit, and a few others. SY77 in '89, they started mixing FM synthesis with AWM samples, so you could actually create hybrid sounds between FM and samplers, or sampled sounds. Very flexible there. And then finally, we get into the physical modeling area with the Yamaha VL1 in '94 and VL7 in '94. Exceptionally rare as well. That was a pinnacle of their sort of physical modeling at the time, technology. And of course, the famous Yamaha AN1X Analog modeling synth in 97 was released. I used to have one of these myself. Great sounding synth, 10 voices. You can do a lot with it, and it sounds fantastic for what it does. It's very versatile. And then moving on, I think that's it for the synths, and then get into drum machines. Some verbiage there, and then there's various items here: Alesis, Boss, some Casio stuff, Crumar, Emu put one out, Kawai had one, Korg, the Mini Pops, the Rhythm 55. Then we get into Lin, the drum computer, the Lin drum, of course, very famous in '82 with 12 PCM sounds and full polyphony and a sequencer. Maestro Rhythm King. Moog had a drum machine as well in 1970. 6 analog sounds. Very cool. Only prototypes were built of this. Novation Drum Station, Oberheim DMX. It's a classic as well. We get to Pollard Syndrome, and then we get into the Roland gear. The TR-33 in 72, the CR-78 in 1978, the TR-808 in 1980, and everybody knows this. This is a classic. 16 analog sounds, 12 notes, sequencer. This has influenced so many different artists and so many genres over the years, including hip-hop and house music, and every other genre as well. A very flexible drum machine. Classic sounds from that Roland TR-8. TR-606 as well in 82. The TR-909, another classic, especially in the techno realm and Detroit techno. Fantastic. The TR-707, the 727. There's the Octopad, and there's a few other items here. The R8. And we get to sequential circuits. They had the Tom, as well as the drum tracks in 84. First drum machine to have MIDI ports, it says. Interesting. And then, of course, there's the Simmons series, the SDS-5 in 81, which obviously was for a complete drum set, but people used the brain unit to actually use it with electronic music programming. And the Yamaha RX-5 as well in 86. And they start talking about samplers. What is a sampler? Sampler usage, etc. And romplers. And then we start talking about a few samplers here at the end. Akai S612 in 85. That's actually a very flexible sampler because it's designed to be used in conjunction with the Akai AX60. So you can plug it into the AX60. You get a second voice as a result, and you can also control a lot of the functions of the sampler through the Akai AX60, like filtering it and all types of envelope control and things like that. Very cool. It's a really unique setup. Akai put out a number of samplers, it looks like here. The S9000, the 950, and the Akai S1000 in 88. There's a few others. We get to Casio, the FZ1. There's the Emu emulator, of course, and the Emulator 2 in 84. Classics as well. The Emax, the Emulator 3 in 87, and the Emax 2 in 89. 16-note polyphony. An Emulator 4 in 94. And then we get to Ensoniq, who, of course, put out the Mirage series, as well as the ASR 10. And then we get to Fairlight in 79. And the Fairlight put out a number of models. There was the CMI, CMI 2 in 82, the CMI 3 in 85. It's a complete system. And then Korg had the DSS 1, which was sort of like an offshoot of the DW8000, but with sampling. Synclavier series, 1977, from New England Digital. It's the only additive and FM synthesizer, but it paved the way for more famous samplers, Synclavier 2. The full system for the Synclavier 2 could cost over £100,000. Even a 16 megabyte RAM card cost £15,000. That's crazy. Oberheim actually had a sampler as well. 12-bit, 8-note polyphony. Roland S10, Roland S220, Roland SS770, and then sequential circuits, Prophet 2000, and then Yamaha with their TX16W. And lastly here, they start going into pre-modern instruments, so early electrical experiments, electrical mechanical stuff, digital computers, experimental music. And so they cover a number of items here, like the Clavecin Electrique, which was in 1759. That was an electric carry-on, it looks like. Very interesting. Used static charges held in a Leyden jar, primitive capacitor, to drive the clappers of the bells. The Wurlitzer theremin, of course, very famous. Trotonium, Rhythmicon, Melichord. The Hammond Novachord in 1939, the first subtractive analog synthesizer ever made. The Novachord has a basic tone and envelope control, but was also a complicated beast of over 160 vacuum tubes and 1,000 capacitors. Wow. Hammond B3, Wurlitzer, Mellotron, and that's it. Some acknowledgments and special thanks to everyone that bought the book. And there's a few other books that Velocity Press also has. So that's the book. Hope you guys enjoyed that little flip through. I know it took a while, but just want to show you what was in here. This is, in my opinion, a fantastic book. Synthesizer Evolution from Analog to Digital and Back. As you can see, it covers a wide gamut of classic synths and a lot of history here. So great synth for any synth nut, or maybe you want to give someone a gift. Definitely worth checking out. And if you're interested to, purchase your own copy, just visit velocitypress.uk or synthevolution.net. I believe those are the websites where you can acquire it. And hats off to Ollie here for doing all this research and illustrating this. I mean, there's over 500. I read there was over 500 illustrations in this book, and that's all hand drawn. So what an achievement here. There's a lot of information and all these facts and statistics and history. So great book. Really recommend it. So thanks for watching today, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on if you recognize any synths in here that you used to own, or some things you maybe you want to acquire, or your favorites. Let us know. Love to hear more from you. Okay, we'll talk to you soon, and thanks for watching. Take care.